Why would a Sumerian scribe carve a careful list of 9 separate peoples, give each one a name and a place in the sky it came from, then quietly note that only 8 of them ever left? The tablet is real. The counting is deliberate. Mesopotamian scribes did not waste wet clay on poetry. They recorded what they were told, in order, with a number at the end. The number at the end of this one is 1, one that came down and stayed. I keep coming back to that line. The 8 that left are written down the way a harbor clerk writes down ships, where each one came from, what it looked like, the day it went home. And then there is the 9th, and the scribe's hand seems to slow, and the entry does not close the way the other 8 do. If you had asked a scholar 100 years ago what this tablet was, they would have called it a god list, a registry of divine names, the kind of thing temple clerks copied out by the thousand. They had no idea. Nobody read it as an account of arrivals until someone set the lines next to each other and saw that they were counting visitors, and counting who left. The powers these people believed in were not all equal. At the top stood the Anunnaki, the great ones, the deciders. They fixed fates, they sat in assembly, they handed down the shape of the world and then sat back to watch it run. Below them came the Igigi, the younger gods, and the Igigi did the work. One of the oldest stories these people told is almost entirely about what that work was and what happened when the ones doing it finally had enough. It is called the Atrahasis. It survives on old Babylonian tablets and in the great library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, and it opens before there was a single human being anywhere. The world had already been divided. Anu took the sky, Enlil took the earth, Enki took the deep water under the ground, and the labor of turning a raw planet into a place you could live fell to the Igigi. The work was digging. The younger gods were sent down to cut the beds of the Tigris and the Euphrates by hand, to carve the long channels that would carry water across the flat southern plain, to haul up the soil that became the farmland of Sumer. One old version counts 300 of them in the heights and 600 in the deep, moving earth, clearing channels year after year after year. The text gives the number 40 for how long they dug, which in that kind of writing just means longer than anyone could stand. And then they broke. The Atrahasis describes it with a clarity that still feels modern. The Igigi set fire to their tools. The picks, the carrying baskets, the things that defined their whole existence, all of it burning in the dark. Then they marched on the house of Enlil at Nippur, the temple they called the Ekur, the administrative heart of the entire cosmos, and they surrounded it at night and refused to move. When the assembly demanded to know who had started it, the answer that came back was that every last one of them had. All of them, together, down to the final god in the ditch. They had picked a spokesman, and the spokesman said the same thing to every question. No single ringleader to punish, no one to make an example of. The whole workforce, standing in the dark outside Enlil's gate, done. Panic moved through the gods above. Anu was called down from heaven. Enlil reached for his weapon and then realized there was nothing to use it on, because you cannot end a revolt by getting rid of the workers when those same workers are the only thing holding the world together. The water had to keep moving, somebody had to keep moving it, and the somebody had just laid down its tools. For the first time in the whole story, the gods were afraid of something they had made. That was the warning, written into the record long before anyone carved the Tablet of 9. The gods who came down to work would not stay down to work forever. And almost every translator who has ever read the Atrahasis walked straight past how strange its opening is. A story about the gods that begins, before anything else, with a labor revolt. The warning sat right there on the clay. Nobody read it as a warning. By the time a scribe sat down to list 9 arrivals, the idea of crowded skies and gods who came down to dig was already old. He was not inventing it, he was tallying it. Now look at how the list itself is built, because the grammar is the whole story. 9 times the scribe presses the same sign, and that sign means came down from above. The same mark, 9 times, stamped like a seal. 8 times he follows it with a second sign, and the second sign means went back up, came down, went back up, came down, went back up. 8 clean pairs in a row. A round trip, recorded 8 times over. On the 9th line, the second sign is missing. Not damaged, not lost to a crack. The signs around it are intact, and there is room on the line. The scribe simply did not press it. A man who measured the height of a star by the width of a finger held at arm's length. A man whose entire trade was precision left the return off the 9th entry. And that is not a copying slip, by the way. The honest reading of the gap is the simple one. There was no return to write down. That missing sign is the open door at the center of all of this. 8 came down and went home. 1 came down and did not. Let me take you through them in the order the scribe set them, because the older stories hang names on these entries that you will recognize. The first 3 are the high ones, the deciders. The first comes down to measure. The tablet describes a power that arrives, divides the sky into fixed regions, sets the path the wanderers will follow across the year, and then rises again. This is Anu, the father of the assembly, the one who held the sky. He comes down, he sets the order overhead, the return sign follows at once. He did not stay. The ones who rule almost never do the staying. The second comes down to claim the ground. Where the first power took the sky, this one takes the land itself. The fields and the cities that have not been built yet command over everything that walks on the surface. This is Enlil, the lord of the air and the earth, the same god whose house the workers would one day surround at Nippur. He descends, he takes the world in hand, and the second sign closes his line. He goes back up too. The third comes down to the water under everything. Not the rivers on the surface, but the deep fresh water the Sumerians called the Abzu, the source they believed sat beneath the soil. This is Enki, the god of that deep, the cleverest of all of them. And you should remember him, because he is going to matter twice more before this is over. He comes down, he claims the water, the return sign follows. 3 deciders, 3 arrivals, and 3 clean departures. Then the list changes its tone, and this is where it stops feeling like a hymn and starts feeling like a logbook. The next 4 entries are not rulers, they are labor. And the scribe breaks them apart by the kind of work each group was sent down to do. The 4th came down to dig the riverbeds. The 5th came down to clear the channels and keep the water moving. The 6th came down to raise the soil, to pile the earth into the banks and the high ground that made farming possible. The 7th came down to build, to set the first walls and the first temples on the ground the others had prepared. 4 arrivals, 4 kinds of work, and if you have read the Atrahasis, you already know their single collective name. These are the Igigi, the younger gods, the 300 and the 600, split by the scribe into the 4 jobs they were sent down to carry. That obsessive sorting, work gang by work gang, is the detail nobody ever thought twice about. It is also the detail that tells you these were not stories to the scribe. You do not itemize a labor force this carefully unless you believe you are keeping a record. And all 4 of them carry the return sign. They went back up, which fits the way the Atrahasis ends the strike, because the gods do not crush the rebellion. They give in to it. They decide to stop using the Igigi as labor at all and to build something else to carry the work. The workers got to go home. So far the count is 8. 3 deciders, 4 work gangs, and the second sign on every one of them. The sky filled, and the sky emptied, 8 times over, clean. The 8th arrival is the strangest of the ones that left, and it leads straight into the 9th, so hold on to it. The 8th does not come down out of the sky. It comes up out of the sea. It is covered in something the scribe compares to the skin of a fish. It reaches the edge of the settled land, and it does not rule, and it does not dig. It teaches. It shows people how to press words into clay, how to count, how to plant a field, how to raise a city and lay out a temple. And then, the tablet says, at the end of every day, it goes back down into the water. We are not guessing at who this is. A Babylonian priest named Atrahasis, writing for a Greek-speaking audience in the 3rd century before the Common Era, set the whole thing down in a history of his country, and later writers preserved his account after the original was lost. He described a being the Sumerians had remembered for thousands of years already. They called it the first of the 7 sages, the Apkallu, and its name comes down to us through the Greek as Oannes. Atrahasis describes it plainly: the body of a fish, the head of a man beneath the fish's head, human feet beneath the tail. It rose out of the Persian Gulf, it taught through the daylight hours, and at sunset it went back into the sea every single day so that it could surface again the next morning and keep teaching. 6 more came after it, 1 to each of the early kings, each surfacing in its turn to add to what the first had given. But the pattern never changed. They came up out of the water, they handed people another piece of the thing we now call civilization, and they went back down at dawn, back at dusk, the most patient round trip on the whole list. The teacher who always left, because the entire arrangement depended on it going home in order to come back, Which brings us, finally, to the ninth. The ninth line carries the arrival sign. Came down from above. It carries a short description, the shortest on the tablet, and it is the one that has kept me up at night. The ninth is neither a ruler nor a teacher. The scribe calls it the one whose blood was opened, the one who was given over. And after that, where every other line closes with the mark for went back up, there is only blank clay. To understand the ninth, you have to go back to the Atrahasis one last time, to what happened after the strike. The clock had already run out on the old arrangement. The gods just had not admitted it yet. The work still had to be done. The water still had to move, or the whole world dried out. But the workers would not go back to the ditch, and the ruling gods were not about to climb down into it themselves. So Enki, the clever one, the god of the deep water, stood up with a plan. And the plan is the single most consequential idea in the entire tradition. They would make a new creature to carry the labor. They would make human beings. But they did not make us out of nothing. The text is very exact about the recipe, and the recipe is where the ninth line lives. Clay from the ground, yes. The birth goddess would shape it with her own hands, the way a potter works wet earth. But mixed into that clay, the gods needed something living, something divine, to give the new creature a mind and a spark, and a sense of itself. So the assembly chose one of their own. They took the god the text calls Wi-Ila in one telling, a god described as the one who carried reason, the one with a self worth using. They opened him. They worked what he was, his blood, and his being into the wet clay. And then they shaped us around it. It was not a gift, and it was not mercy. It was a handoff. The endless work the Igigi had finally refused did not vanish when they walked away from it. It simply came down a level, onto the backs of the new creatures the gods had just built, onto us. And the one thing that made us able to carry it, the mind, the spark, the stubborn sense of being someone, was cut out of a god who was never once asked whether he wanted to give it. That is the ninth on the list, the one whose blood was opened, the arrival with no departure, because there was nothing left to send back up. He did not ascend like the deciders. He did not slip back into the sea like the teacher at dusk. He was taken apart and folded into the mud, and the mud stood up and walked, and it has been walking ever since. The one that never left did not stay in a sealed chamber, or a buried city, or a cave under a mountain. It stayed in us. And no, I am not making that up for effect. The account of the divine essence worked into the clay sits right there in the oldest creation story Mesopotamia ever produced. Roughly 15 centuries before the book of Genesis told a quieter version of the same idea, the first human shaped from clay, given breath, and set to work the ground. The older version said the part out loud that the later one kept in the dark, that whatever wakes up inside a person was not grown here. It was put in, it came down, and it was the one arrival the record could never close. There is a reading that takes every word of this literally. Zechariah Sitchin built his life's work on it, the claim that the Anunnaki were a living species from a planet he called Nibiru, that they came here to mine gold, and that we were made to carry the labor the moment the workers above us walked off the job. That reading is his own, and it sits far out at the speculative edge of all this. The texts do not hand you the planet or the gold, but they hand you the shape of it, gods who came down to work, gods who refused, a new creature built to take their place, with a piece of the divine buried inside it so it would never stop. I do not know whether the scribe believed any of it literally. Maybe he was copying an older list and faithfully kept a gap he did not understand. Or maybe the missing sign on line 9 is the most honest mark on the whole tablet, a man refusing to write down a departure that never happened. I keep landing on that second one, because everything else about the list is so controlled, so carefully paired, so obsessively sorted, that the one ragged edge starts to look less like a mistake and more like the only place the scribe told the entire truth. Whatever the truth of it, the list does one thing plainly. It counts. 8 that the record sends home, 1 that it cannot. So when people ask what the Sumerians thought visited this planet, the answer is not a fleet and not a landing. It is a hierarchy that came and went. Deciders who dropped down to set the order and rose back through it. Work gangs who tore open the ground and then tore up their tools and withdrew. A teacher who surfaced to give us everything and slipped under the water at dark. 8 kinds of arrival, 8 returns, a sky that emptied itself out as cleanly as it filled, except for the 9th, the one whose blood was opened, the arrival sign, and then nothing. The scribe left that line unfinished 4,000 years ago, and every honest reading since has had to leave it unfinished too, because the tablet is right. There was never going to be a return sign for that one. It did not come down to visit. It came down to become the thing that does the work. And it is still doing the work. In every person who has ever stood up out of the mud of this planet and felt a self switch on behind their eyes and wondered where that spark actually came from. 8 went home, 1 stayed, and the one that stayed is the one reading this.